All right, good morning, everyone. We're about to get started here. So this is a panel on biotech accelerators and incubators. We have a great team here and excited to hear about it. So we'll start by each of the panelists talking about their specific organization, what they do, how it works, 5 to 7 minutes each. And then jump into some questions. So I have a few questions for the group, but hoping for some questions from the audience as well. So please be prepared to jump in with questions towards the end of the session. So Johannes, you're the last one here. Why don't you start off?
Roger, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Johannes Frühhoff. I'm here representing Biolabs and Lab Central. Those are two brands of sort of the same thing that I run as founder and CEO, where we build startups. And we build startups through space and community. And if any of you are thinking about spinning out some technology from an academic center, this is now the place to do this at. And it changes the way that people think about building startup companies, because in the old days you used to have to raise a bunch of money first and then get your space ready, because you can't really do this in your garage. Build a lab, get the permits, buy some equipment. And we, through painful experience of our own, we found this to be quite inefficient and turned this around. So now we have spaces where people can come, and you will see everything there, from a pipette through incubators and equipment up to a mass spec or an animal facility in some cases. You can go and do your experiments first, and then you have to pay. It's not free. You have to pay rent. It's not cheap either, but it's much better deal than putting the capital up front. We've started this in Boston about 10 years ago, Cambridge to be exact, and now have built I think the largest network of such facilities around the world. We have currently 18 labs up and running in 8 states and 4 countries. And companies are doing pretty well, even though we are seeing a slight softening now in the market. That's due to the hard time that our companies have raising money. Just a few numbers. We have approximately 400 companies on the platform today that would use our labs today. The average residence time is about 18 to 24 months. So we don't compete with the real estate people who want to be long-term landlords for them. We are, in a way, even a feeder to that system. And we are very big on building community, because we think that is sort of the peer learning and the tie into other stakeholders is one of the most important aspects that we can facilitate through condensating all of this activity to one place. And maybe I'll pass it on to Anne first.
Yep.
Great.
Thanks, Johannes. So the engine, we started about 6 years ago. So like Johannes mentioned, we're also like a startup 6 years in. We were focused on getting started in deep partnership with MIT and really trying to fill the gap that was seen between what we refer to as commercialization of tough technology. So for us, that definition is a combination of breakthrough science, engineering, and technology to solve sets of world problems, both in human health, but also in climate and how we move bits and bytes and people around the world. So that's sort of the mission of the engine, is how do we grow and develop the tough tech ecosystem. And when we started, there were really 3 ingredients to this experiment that we were going to run. It was the recognition that for these types of companies to get started that had these very convergent teams, that they needed real money to get started, they needed the specialized space and services, and that they needed like a network, particularly corporates, government, et cetera, to help understand who customers are, get feedback, maybe get early pilots and feasibility studies. So those 3 things were the pillars of the engine. So fast forward 6 years, we have about 700 million under management. We have a couple 100,000 square feet of specialized services and space. we have the benefit that Johannes and the team helped us stand up our very first space, which, given what we do, is both a combination of biolabs, chem labs, kind of heavy and light duty machine shop, where we were able to learn a lot about how do you run these shared spaces, and then continue in that sort of domain that accommodates both, mechanical engineering, double E's, et cetera, as a combination, in many cases with life sciences and biology. And then sort of a broad network of folks around the engine that we've drawn, and through our own sort of annual and periodic gatherings of people of the sort of the tough technology community. So very similar to, I think, the viewpoint that you and the team hold. It's what makes Boston particularly special is the critical mass that we have here of great clinical centers as well as academic institutions and their collaboration, and our ability to translate those things, out of those environments and into commercial, and that we need sort of all types of specialized spaces and networks and capital to get those companies sort of up and founded. And so depending on sort of the type of company that one is starting or founding and the type of first-time CEO or founder, I think Boston is an amazing ecosystem to find that slot that's going to best accelerate your company in the first 12 months, in the first 2 years, and then in the next 5 years, and then 5 to 15 years thereafter. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Kate, who yet has awesomeness in the Boston and beyond.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. Kate Brummie, CEO of Mass Challenge. For those of you who are not familiar, we're a global nonprofit headquartered here in the Seaport. We've been working over the last 13 years to support high-impact, high-potential entrepreneurs like Launch and Grow. We like to think of ourselves as a global network of innovators where we support our mission through a portfolio of accelerator programs and accelerator-like programs which support entrepreneurs in the very early stages of their journey, and then also at a later stage connect specifically to customers or collaborators that are necessary to prove the concept and move into commercialization. Last year, we were fortunate to work with over 650 startups across our platform in Boston. We have offices in Texas, Mexico City, Lausanne, Switzerland, and Jerusalem, Israel, and then are active in other areas of Latin America, Asia, and Africa through a Bridge to Mass Challenge program where we work with local partners on the ground, often helping entrepreneurs in region and helping the entrepreneurs connect into our more mature markets. Given our DNA here in Massachusetts and the areas in which we operate, we have an amazing cohort of healthcare, life science, biotech companies, and through our model, which is no equity, no cost to founders, find that we're a very happy first home for founders that are typically taking an insight, an invention, discovery out of a lab into life, often on the pathway to the engine or to Lab Central here in Boston or biolabs in our shared space in Dallas. And so our goal is really to provide on-ramps to entrepreneurs in those early stages. A couple other things that I'll note, and then I'll pass it over to Mark. One is, 3 things that we think are unique and that we work hard to make valuable to founders, particularly we think in this biotech space, is that we are a non-equity partner. We work hard to help connect founders to grant opportunities, the right capital partners, then we give away a small amount of grant capital ourselves each year. We have a model that's powered by the crowd, so thousands of experts who volunteer time, network, knowledge to help founders get focused on the right problem set, make smarter, faster decisions, and then often access resources that's valuable in that time way. And then also we look to be a global platform to partners as they, to our startups as they look to find partners, enter to new markets, et cetera, over their journey. And we love being based here in Boston. We think this is a exceptionally unique place where the opportunity to bring even more the amazing scientific minds out of labs into life to tackle our most pressing problems is huge, and we have a magnificent set of resources and a really strong commitment to collaborative ecosystem. I think all of us on stage here work together, and our teams work together on a daily basis to support those at really the frontier of change. So, Mark.
Thanks so much, Kate. Thanks, Roger, for running this. Thanks, everyone, for coming. My name is Mark Succi. I'm the Executive Director of the Mesh Incubator, also a radiologist, prior life inventor. Had trouble navigating the pathway and eventually did it. So we exist inside the hospital. Mass General Brigham, we have an on-campus shared prototyping space. What's unique and challenging about our incubator is that we need to work with researchers and clinicians who really have two primary incentives in academics, and that's to positively impact patient care. That could be through research, that could be through taking care of patients, but also to get promoted and play the academic game. So we need to make innovation additive and an accelerant for their two primary goals, not a detractor. So it's a big cultural challenge for us. We have three primary divisions. One's education. So about 4 years ago when we started with an educational course. So in person, on campus, 1 week we integrated it into a ACGME residency program where we'll teach hands-on how to become an innovator. So that means what are patents, licensing, working through HBS business cases, bringing in venture, how to start your own company, all these talks to really get folks speaking the language. With innovation, we expanded that course to an online masterclass. We recorded 20 sessions in addition to a grand round series. Complete that on your own time. So if you're a researcher, you're seeing patients, you can't exactly take a week off. Watch a session, come back, answer some questions, do all 20 sessions, get a signed certificate from Chris Coburn and myself that you've completed the fundamentals to innovation. Now you can speak the language, come to conferences like this and get the most out of it. Number two is a biodesign program that works with your clinical schedule. So not leaving the hospital for a year, right, because you still need to publish, you still need to keep up those incentives. But clinicians at the earliest stage, some of them have patents, most of them just have ideas, will come to us in our program with an idea. We'll go to MIT, we'll go to HBS, we'll get business leads for them. We'll pillage the engineering schools and get engineers for them, computer scientists, build 3 to 5 person teams, these mini companies, and in 10 months walk them through workshops, so market validation, investing, funding, and design reviews, where we'll bring in experts to review their deck month after month after month. So at the end of the year, they're de-risked sufficiently and they have a great start to apply and leverage Mass Challenge competitions, all the amazing colleagues on stage. So we're really a feeder to those programs. And lastly, mentorship. It's a big thing for faculty who weren't trained in innovation. They need to be mentored. We have an online platform we've developed in the last year or so called Innovation Mesh Network. It's under MGB Innovation. A third of our faculty across the enterprise has actually signed up, which tells us that there's a thirst for doing this kind of stuff. But it's where you can sign up. It's a private innovator LinkedIn. Fill out your innovator profile. You are such and such. You're an investor who has this amount of cash, who's looking for this. Maybe you're a clinician who practices at the Brigham, who's an associate professor in surgery. And you can actually search all these structured profiles, message, connect, all on the platform. What we're really trying to do, and we have Harvard and MIT on the platform as well, over 2,000 users. What we're really trying to do is expand across different states. So folks that are enterprising, but maybe they're at a community hospital in rural America, connect with our office or the amazing colleagues here, all the resources, other folks, talk with them, message them, form teams that don't necessarily need to be in the same physical location. So that's one of our big interests. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Rob.
Sure. So maybe building on mentorship, because mentorship is a key component of a lot of accelerators and incubators. So Mark, you talked about what you do for mentorship. If other folks want to talk about how mentorship either deliberately or accidentally works, within your systems. So Johannes, you want to talk about Lab Central and others?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I personally benefited greatly. I went through that same transition, right? I'm trained as a physician. I came to Boston to my postdoc from Germany and never knew about the pathways in entrepreneurship. I quote this, I don't think I had ever heard the word venture capital or how venture works before I came to Boston. So I personally benefited from this. And I put great value in the network and the generosity of more experienced mentors or colleagues that take you under their wing and help you in a formal or informal way. When we set up our programs, we had to make a decision, and we decided not to require some formal enrollment into classes or courses, and rather have very ample offerings of programs and talks and seminars, small and large, that people can then self-elect to attend and hopefully meet others, rather than making them go through formalized training. I think both are valid for different stages of innovators. The people that come to us, they typically are a little bit further advanced. They would typically have incorporated a company already. Most will have raised some external financing. And some of them are very experienced serial entrepreneurs as well. But if you come to Lab Central or Biolabs today, you will find a community where there's an event at least every day. Just now we had an event from the Mass Life Sciences Center here in Massachusetts about pathways into entrepreneurship, right? Last week we had tons of events around bio. We often have scientific events or seminars where lawyers come in to talk about all these topics that we don't get taught about in medical school or when we study biology or chemistry at the graduate level. Things like licensing, things like how to negotiate, HR questions. If you want to build a workforce in innovation, you need to learn about immigration and how to recruit the best talent, how to incentivize and keep them, how to be a good manager to them. Most people never get taught to be a good manager. So there are lots of things that our first-time entrepreneurs especially have to learn in order to be successful. And there's also an important cultural shift that they have to undergo away from just thinking about impact factors and the academic credentials. And it's very laudable to hear MGH, see that MGH has recognized that, and they've been great partners in this, to understand their own mission to also include, in addition to research and patient care and teaching, to also include the mission of creating innovation that will arrive in the world as products or as drugs. We are now in many countries, including in Europe and in other states in America, where we do this type of program. And I have to tell you that in many cases, we still fight and struggle mightily with the academic mindset that thinks that engaging in some kind of commercializing your ideas is sort of the dark side or is in any way dirty or not worthwhile. And there's a lot of education that has to happen still. But if you're in Boston, you find yourself in one of the best environments to do this.
Yeah, it's interesting, the cultural change. I remember years ago, we had a presentation from one of our hospital presidents talking about the importance of innovation and how it drives to products, and that's going to help patients. After the talk was over, one of our investigators came up, who was a serial innovator, had done 3 or 4 companies. He came up to me and said, "Wow, this whole time I thought I was tolerated. I didn't realize I was encouraged." So it is that feeling within academia of maybe, am I supposed to be doing this? Is it okay? So that's important.
And there are some, I don't want to go over time, but I feel very passionate about this. And if you are a representative of a different institution or a country or a region, there are some very easy practices to take home and talk to us afterwards. Like give your faculty the freedom of like 1/5 of their time off to pursue ventures. Recognize in their academic progression the societal impact that they're making by creating drugs or products out of their ideas. That's equally as important as teaching medical students and so forth. Lots of other good points to just take home.
So Anne in the engine?
Really good. Maybe just a few additional points to pull the thread on, because I think, as was mentioned, a lot of the sort of workshops are super important. So maybe I'll just focus on 2 others. I think one, which I think many people see, and Rebecca, we were just talking about, was also like the design of the space that you give to the innovators, I think is also important. So creating a template for a building or the space in the office, or where is the lunchroom, whereas the coffee machine, and you need a coffee machine, like all of that we have found is if the space is designed with intention that there are places to do, I'm going to call it do the work. There are the labs and the offices, but there is a place for the groups to convene and have a lot of touch points, both formally and informally, to do the workshops in sort of formal, larger spaces, but also the informal design we have found to be really important if you're going to create a space for these types of innovators, because they will, you want them to learn from one another, because those that are a little bit past and those that are just starting, if the community has the orientation of like giving back to those who are a year behind you, I think that's one of the most important elements, because for most entrepreneurs, it's sort of important that they not listen to information that they don't need, but when the information that they need, it needs to be right there when they need it. So something that's going to help them in 2 years actually isn't helpful until they get, often until the 3 to 6 months like before they need it or at the moment that they need it. So that informality, but with intention, I think is important. The other piece that you mentioned that is an area that we focus on in sort of the workshop type of setting is people use the word, what's the narrative or what's the story? And there was a really interesting podcast that Bill Gates did with Rashida Jones. For any of you who follow Gates Notes, they have a podcast together. And Yuval, sort of a famous author about civilization, was talking about the difference between sort of storytelling and its purpose in the role of history, and how that is different than lying. So we work with many technical founders, and they feel like they are lying if they're trying to put forth a vision. Whereas the power of a narrative and storytelling is very important, but it is not the same thing as your credentials and providing factual information. So we focus a lot with the group on what are the strategies you can employ and with your team so that you can tell the arc of why your stuff matters. Why is it going to matter to the world? You do not have it in your hand today. But you have to give people a reason to care about what you're doing before you actually have it in your hand. So we spend a lot of time on that storytelling and narrative, because we find that for very technical people, your credibility rests on being very accurate to what you have in hand today and not over-promising against what you don't have. However, to proceed to create a new world that we don't have today, you must be able to tell the story of the future world. But the power is sort of how do you do both of those things simultaneously and in a way that feels genuine to those narrating. So I'll just add that as a little vignette.
That's great.
Great vignette. I'll emphasize a couple things. One is, we think of there being several different forms of mentorship. Peer mentorship is a really powerful and potent one, and that can develop in sort of these concentrated areas, whether that's an accelerator or in a shared space, but when it goes right, will often go on for a long period of time and allow founders to access information in a timely fashion, also from people who understand their journey. The other types of mentors, and our programs are primarily sort of mentor-driven, are one, those classic sort of coaches really helping you think about the shape of your company. Second would be more technical advisors that can help you address a more specific problem set. And then the third we think of often as mentorship from your future customer, helping provide feedback, et cetera. And I think what we've learned over our 13-year history, including with some experimental research we've done with MIT, is that focus is actually your friend when it comes to mentorship. So it's good to have as an individual sort of open-ended coach or advisors that you may speak to, but when it comes to getting advice for your company, it is helpful to know what problem am I trying to solve, and then match to a mutually beneficial person, because as Anne was just mentioning, gathering too much information over too long a period can actually be sort of distracting and confusing. And so, our programs are very much designed to help founders identify what the most critical problem is and then match to the right type of mentor in that time-bound way. And that's actually specifically and statistically important in healthcare, where matching both functional problem and expertise is uniquely important in the broader array of startups.
Right. So Mark, you kicked off the mentoring discussion already, but I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add there.
Yeah, just 2 quick points. Recently, we did made a tool. So we make tools for the hospital as well as needed with the MGH Center for Faculty Development, a mentorship platform. And we published a study that actually found there's a difference between mentee-initiated connections and mentor-assigned connections in terms of satisfaction and ultimate productivity. So I think one of our missions is to allow the mentee to select who they believe a good mentor would be. If you ask me, hey, I need advisement of someone from my startup who's done equity before, or a clinician, you're limited to my network and people I resonate with, but that might not be the best person for you. So using our network, we allow them to search themselves and scale that up. The only second thing I was going to say with Johannes is, I can talk about this all day too, is the education component is so crucial from a cultural standpoint. By putting it in a residency program, I think what we did is making it a core rotation, saying that, okay, you'll rotate through the surgical service, but you also rotate through the innovation service. It's that level of important, but also recognizing that not everyone wants to go beyond that, and to allow those additional workshops and opportunities for those who want to advance. When I came to residency, I was told not really to talk about, I had invented a device in the Langer lab, not to talk about this stuff, because you're seen as a flight risk, right? You're supposed to practice medicine. I did it anyways because I didn't have much to my application. I had some stuff. But what I realized is the leaders in charge at Mass General, Brigham, and other institutions recognize the value of stuff that they're not necessarily involved in. So my program director had been a clinician for 50 years and still saw the value in this stuff. So I would just challenge everyone in the audience to identify those types of people who see the value in what you're doing, but might not be doing it themselves. And if you're a leader at these institutions, to try and be a leader who can see value in stuff that you might not have personal experience in.
Great. So I believe that each of your organizations got their start in Boston, but are now active well beyond Boston, across the country, and even some internationally. And maybe some thoughts on, we live in this environment which is, just say, enriched in so many ways. What it's like and how you do things maybe differently outside the Boston region than you would inside the Boston area, or outside of those areas that are Boston, San Francisco, et cetera. So same, different, and just thoughts on that.
I can take this and start. So we are very deliberate about the approach that we employ when we go to a different place. So now we have labs in France, in Germany, and in Japan, in addition to different states in the US. And of course, the conditions are very different in each of these. Japan, for example, you will find a really great base of biomedical academic research in the hospitals, and in the complete absence of entrepreneurial support or risk-taking or tolerance for failure. And so a big part of what we do is to create a protected space for these few self-selected people who find us to tinker and play in a protected sandbox and have others to talk with and try to create a little bit of critical mass. We also have lots of initiatives in Japan with the government and institutional representatives to try and help them with some of our learnings about how they can use their role to celebrate entrepreneurship and individuals as examples and role models. So that's one approach. Then in other geographies, for example, Germany, we now have a lab in Heidelberg, which is where I did my own doctoral work, and it's a great little academic town that has a university that's like 600 or 800 years old and very little entrepreneurship. And so there we actually need to create much more focused programs, a little bit like Mass Challenge, what Mass Challenge offers, where you can really have a much tighter surrounding for students and wannabe entrepreneurs. So in each case, we have to find what are the local realities, and then also work with existing local stakeholders to have the credibility and the buy-in. The nice thing about doing this now from Boston is that we can extract from Kendall and from Boston what works, right? And I mean, we are at the point of benefiting from 30, 40 years of random experimentation and things that went right and others that went wrong. And now we're able to really see there are like 6 or 7 very essential don't do without success factors for creating sort of these entrepreneurial ecosystems that are likely to be more successful. And so you can actually now accelerate the development of a new place if you very deliberately go about licensing policies, about talent access, and about venture capital financing and physical spaces and so forth. So there are a somewhat limited number of things that we can identify as success factors. And if you are now, I don't know, a region that wants to build this and you have leadership that is able to invest, you can now accelerate this significantly by focusing in on a few very distinct required success parameters.
Anne or Kate, I don't know if you have anything to...
Yeah, I think those were great comments in terms of identifying the local factors that you have to work with, and then where do you need to augment given that local ecosystem, but being able to use a global network to inform. I think the other piece that we've seen is that to be open to, if you look at the entrepreneurs, what I would observe is that who is an entrepreneur in Boston may be distinct from who is an entrepreneur in Houston or in Japan, and that sort of the mental model of who is an entrepreneur and how are they going to be successful can be different in different locations. We have some very distinct sort of phenotypes that we would observe have evolved in different parts just of the US, because while we've looked at some companies in Europe, I can't say that we have expertise there, but even within the US, what does that entrepreneurial community look like, and what are the phenotypes of the entrepreneurs that can be successful and look very different than like the models that we have in Boston. So we always kind of try to start with the nugget of the entrepreneur and the entrepreneurial community, and then the rest sort of gets scaffolded like around like what are the models of entrepreneurs being successful like in a region, and what could be successful, and then to scaffold from there to create more profiles, et cetera, of successful entrepreneurial teams.
I mean, I can add more stories around that, but if we want to move on, I'll leave it to you, Roger, as our MC.
No, keep going.
I'll keep going. Okay, so maybe the couple things I'll add is, so what we've observed is what is required in each context is quite different in terms of what are the pathways to success. And I'll give a couple examples. One is in Israel, there's some exceptional research and development and a very vibrant ecosystem around the community there, but entrepreneurs have to export to grow. Ultimately, the market's too small. And so one of the roles we play is not only to support entrepreneurs sort of within their markets, but really to prepare them to export sort of as early as is appropriate, and to help them determine the right markets to enter, et cetera. And so that's a very different need that's pretty unique to Israel. That's very different than in some of our work in Africa, for example, where the needs for the entrepreneurs' pathways to success are often to access resources that may be outside their ecosystem today, while we also work with our local partners to grow and foster the local support system as well. And Houston, or Dallas, I would say, where Johannes and I have shared, is even more different. I think a lot of natural assets, if you would, with the research community and the sort of legacy industry there, but has just not come around the entrepreneur in a structured way. A lot of opportunity to import knowledge and know-how around how to encourage ventures to come out of research institutions. So sort of those are the critical pathways we're focused on in that market. And you could go on with different stories from there.
Yeah, great. So we've all seen the really awful numbers in venture capital of how much money goes to female entrepreneurs, how much money goes to minority entrepreneurs, et cetera. And one of the questions we had is sort of, are accelerators and incubators a path to normalizing that to where it should be, or thoughts on that? Maybe Mark, since you're up.
It's a huge problem. Some of you might know we had a HBS case study on this at Mass General Brigham. There's definitely a gender gap and a URM gap in who innovates and what the barriers are to innovation. So you ask a male, what are the barriers to innovation? A lot of them will actually say it's not knowledge. I know everything already. But you ask that same question to female, that it's actually reversed. It's I need the knowledge. I need the mentors. I don't have this stuff. So I think you got to be intentional in the programs you create. We have several programs aimed specifically at meeting with the community. So we met with the community, just to give you one example, called Scope HQ in Jamaica Plain. It's a small community shop run by a group of women and URM staff, where they do these interesting artworks and sell paintings to the community, but they have very unique perspectives on what the challenges in accessing healthcare is. So I think you got to be intentional and actually meet with the community that you want to serve. In Greater Boston, it's easy to stay in Longwood, or it's easy to stay by MGH in Beacon Hill, but intentional programs. The other thing is mentorship, putting together specific, I call them advisory boards for our innovators, and making those advisory boards diverse for the diversity of the innovators you want to attract. Great.
I don't know, Johannes, you have any thoughts there?
I think it is a massive problem and shortcoming. I think I do believe that a priori our infrastructure lowers the bar for everybody and makes it so that you don't have to raise 5 million to get a biotech started, but you can start with 500,000 or 250,000. So that's available to many more people than used to be. So that in itself lowers the bar. We still have, if you look at who are our founders, mostly a racial gap. Lab Central, I'm very proud of that initiative, started about a year and a half ago, an initiative called Lab Central Ignite. You should look it up. We have great leadership in there, great team running it, and its sole purpose is to close or to improve the underrepresentation of certain groups in biotechnology and open our industry up and the careers available up to people who don't look like you and I. And so it's early days, but they are doing great work and with a whole very ambitious outset of goals from kindergarten to boardroom to really map that career path and see where are the failure points, where certain populations lack traction or they don't pursue a path towards science that would lead them into our industry. We do that out of two main reasons. One, it's the right thing to do, and we have in Boston a very diverse population that is not all in Kendall Square and not all represented. And two, we actually have a lot of jobs that we can't fill in our industry, and a lot of people who are looking for employment opportunity. So if you find yourself on the T, maybe you've seen recently our public awareness campaign. It's called Life Sciences in Full Color, and you saw career stories of people with non-traditional pathways, maybe just a high school degree or even sort of a training in another area that made their way into the biotech industry, and we want to use these as role models. We've just partnered with the City of Boston to roll out an enhanced and larger version of that. And we are also, I think it's been announced, building a big training lab in Roxbury in the P3 parcel next to the police headquarters that will allow Lab Central Ignite to do the job training that we currently offer at Lab Central at a much larger scale and on-site in Roxbury for these populations. So I think it's a very big need. I'm proud of what the team does there, but we'll certainly need many more initiatives in that area.
Anne?
Yep. Let's see. So I think most people, I have the pleasure of working at a firm that is, there are 4 GPs, 3 of us are women, and the other one is male, but on Facebook is 51% female. So So I have the pleasure of working with a partnership and really the founding team of the Engine, as at least on a gender basis, is quite unusual within the venture firm arena. The other piece that comes with the orientation and the mission of the Engine, where we report out on a biannual basis a number of our metrics, including diversity, is as I think you've heard from all of us, it's actually paying attention and looking at your own numbers and seeing, do they reflect the population that you are there to either serve, finance, et cetera, I think is really important. If you're coming and looking at university or academic clinical translation, if you look at what those undergraduate, graduate student, postdoc populations look like, in my mind, if you're just cross-checking your own metrics against, do you actually look like the populations that you are serving? And there's a big gap, like that's kind of our first step in who has the opportunity to be a founder. So I think whether or not people are putting forth what their numbers are, I think the first step is that you recognize where you're coming from and then recognize what you're doing, which is the approach that we take at the Engine. And if you're seeing a gap, you got to figure out why you're doing that. One piece that we have found that a number of researchers have identified, that it's a lot easier for people to deal with diversity if they're doing things in batch versus one-on-one. So I think that's the advantage just from a research perspective of the work that we're doing, is that a lot of us have programs that are, I'm going to say, kind of batch-oriented programs. So you can really get an understanding of who are you admitting into the program, not on a one-by-one decision, but on like a net decision. Many of the programs that we run related to helping what we call proto-entrepreneurs is very much in that style. When you have 70 teams representing 200 people, it's pretty easy before you kind of hit go on that to understand what type of diversity is represented, and does that reflect what you actually thought you were going to get. So I think that's the other piece that I think, especially in the accelerators and incubators and early venture, that we can do is really to hold ourselves to those standards of what's coming into the pipeline. Are we reflecting that? And therefore, the ones who come after us, that's who has the opportunity to be the next set of entrepreneurs and founders that will be funded.
Great. I mean, the numbers are staggering, and they've been incredibly persistent over time, even with effort and intention. So I think it's just important to call that out. And the more we're exposed to that, the more intention we have. I think measurement is a necessary and critical way to hold all of us accountable to our commitments, and then also to help us direct to the most potent interventions that we as unique institutions can bring to bear on this problem, whether that's supporting and exposing a broader array of potential inventors, whether that's providing on-ramps in a much more intentionally inclusive way, or allocating capital that actually reflects the diversity of talent. So that's really important. The other, I'll add sort of two other things to this conversation. One is, often when we think about diversity, we focus on the founder from a race and gender perspective. I think it's really important also to note that being open to and specifically supporting first-time founders is an important additional aspect of this, as well as from being outside sort of the typical walks of life. And so ensuring that we are, in fact, looking to support new blood into this pipeline is really critical. And then second, that in the pursuit of equity, you often need inequitable interventions. And so the way we think about that at Mass Challenge, for example, is we will overinvest in helping founders of color get access to capital, because we think that's required in order for us to cross that chasm. And I think that it's really important for all of our institutions to continue to modify and adapt what we're doing to make sure that it's actually impactful to a much more diverse set of constituents. And that may mean we need programs or capital partnerships or mentor programs that just look a little bit different than they did 10 years ago, or even today, and for a different set of stakeholders.
Great. So we've got a little over 10 minutes left, so we're ready to take questions from the audience. I don't know if we have a mic. Yes, we do have a mic. So if anybody has a question, just raise your hand, and I think Casey can get the mic to you. Don't be shy. All right, there we go. Seema?
I think I'll be loud enough. I know you guys talked about, all of you have your start and a base in Boston and Massachusetts. And each of you are serving a slightly different niche. Can you give some more examples of how maybe you are sharing, let's say, on mentor network or other resources, or collaborating on initiatives with diversity? So how are these, as four different organizations, do you guys collaborate? Maybe you could collaborate more or accelerate?
I can name sort of three things just to get us started. So one is we think of ourselves as a pipeline partner, certainly for Lab Central. And so when our companies graduate with Johannes' team, we do offboarding sessions where entrepreneurs learn about the amazing resources that Lab Central offers, or in the case of Dallas, BioLab offers, so that as they move on to their next step of life, they're aware of the types of facilities and sustained community that exist beyond the accelerator walls. That's one. I think the second would be, and Johannes and I have been at probably 5 ecosystem sort of convenings over the last several months, really, and that's part of our collective commitment to strengthening, sustaining the Massachusetts ecosystem, so coming together with unique perspectives to advise on initiatives, investments, policy, collaborations that could support and deepen the growth and development of this ecosystem. And then third is we've been partnered with MGB for several years now through our health tech program, where entrepreneurs have the opportunity to get support navigating MGB to find individuals who could provide feedback, sort of potentially even pilot opportunities as they build their digital health solutions. And so that's an example of a more formal partnership.
Other questions? Over there.
So it seems like all of your programs combine some combination of capital or community or space or shared equipment to support these founders. I'm curious, in recent years, are there certain gaps that as you kind of lower the barriers to those things, you're noticing, hey, this is something we really need to provide to support these entrepreneurs, and kind of any trends in terms of programming or resources that you feel really differentiates your programs that you might not have noticed a few years ago?
Yeah, I can take this. I think you have to switch my mic on and off. Turn it on. Can you hear me? I can also just speak up. So the question is about how do we respond to the changing needs, really, I think, of the entrepreneurs. And so it's been very interesting for us to see how, indeed, even with like 12, 13 years of experience now doing this in Kendall, the needs of our companies have already changed. Why? Because the biology is changing, because we are learning about tools that no one talked about even 10 years ago. If you weren't a bacterial genomics expert, you hadn't heard about CRISPR in 2010 or 2012. Now everybody's using that in their screens, right? Or the tools that we now have available with cell therapies and gene therapies are becoming mainstream. And we will see many more drugs in our clinical practice that come out of that. And our facilities weren't built to support that. So we are always, I think, very closely following the technologies that our entrepreneurs bring into our starter labs. And we've recently opened a lab that's called Lab Central 238 on Main Street in Cambridge that's now specifically built to support those needs of growing cell and gene therapy companies, where they can do process development and scale-up of manufacturing for these very complex therapeutic products. And so that's just one example of how we are trying to stay sort of in tune with the needs that we hear from the community, but there will always be a certain lag, of course.
Yeah, maybe just to add a couple points onto that. One, very much on that line, is I think even more today we're seeing very sort of convergent teams. So whereas before teams might have been sort of, I'm going to say, dominantly a domain of biology, maybe with business development, finance, especially in the early days, it was sort of dominated by and large, a set of scientists who understood each other and used the same language. In the convergent sort of teams that we're seeing today, I'm going to keep picking on you, Rebecca. It's like the founding team of Soleno was a former optics CEO who had built like semiconductor foundries, 2 physicists, and a stem cell biologist. It's like the start of a joke, but that represents like the founding team. So I think even more the types of skills of how do you build these types of convergent teams that need to be curious about one another and not siloed, but everyone can't do everybody's job. So I think there's an interesting challenge with a lot of the newer companies we're seeing. And also, again, coming back to who has the opportunity to be a founder in these types of convergent teams, it's often first-time CEOs, but often very early in career CEOs who are coming out of the work that understands multiple of these domains. So in some ways, it's like back to the managerial skills. We're seeing more of a need as we're able to go, broader and who has the opportunity to be founders and first-time executives. They may be earlier in career, but therefore the managerial skills, which was alluded to earlier, being able to teach that, quickly without having, 7 to 10 years of industry experience managing teams. How do you get that skill set in there? So those would be the 2 things I think we've seen.
Great.
To add in virtual on top of that convergence, I think that adds a whole nother layer of complexity. So we have several teams where the research may be in Texas, but the AI functions in Toronto or New Jersey and Israel, for example, and so navigating also the building of teams in a much more distributed environment. Obviously, some of the physical science has to be one place, but as you have these convergent teams, much more complex in terms of getting these companies off the ground.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. So I will ask one last question on behalf of the audience, do you have 2 questions? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to ask the question of the life outside of your program, so I'm reasonably familiar with those. So the first part of the question is what you would like to see from the founders that come to your program that is not there, right? And the kind of other end of the question is what you think is missing in the ecosystem, both here in Boston and generally for the graduates?
Who wants to take that?
I can start with a little bit on the founder side. For us operating inside the hospital, it's primarily an enthusiasm to actually execute and follow through on what you're doing. Physicians, researchers, when they have an idea, it's the best idea ever. But ideas, obviously are cheap, and it's really someone who's willing to put in the time, the sweat equity to execute on the ideas and delegate. The other thing, I would say is when we started our incubator in the hospital, we didn't necessarily predict the impact it would have on other service lines in the hospital. So for example, now we have 10 founders with 3 making a medical device. Well, we need to get them animal experiments. How are we supposed to do that? Well, we don't have that much funding. We would stack the animal experiments, or we need X tools in a physical space that has to be 50 feet from the surgical suite because surgeons operate on a different schedule. So learning about those things and changing our incubator to accommodate that has been something we focused on.
I don't know that I would want anything different from our founders. We sort of love them in all the shapes and forms they come in, but maybe one suggestion is in an arena where there's so much opportunity and different types of support, just encourage founders to be really thoughtful about what the purpose is or the goal of engaging with a certain ecosystem partner, because you'll get more out of it and they can support you in a more targeted way. I think our worst case scenarios where we have founders sort of distributed across multiple things engaged in none. And I think it's a much stronger relationship where we really know what we can do to support you, and you know why, for example, why you're at Mass Challenge. And I would imagine it's the same with each of my partners up here as well.
So what's missing when they graduate? You think in the ecosystem, when the companies graduate, some of them succeed, some not. What do you think is missing to get them over?
Founders will always say money. That's for sure. I think, and I know we've talked a lot about community, but helping founders find their way to the supportive community, particularly in this arena, it's a really long timeline to known success. And so having the perseverance, having the social network or set of partners that help you navigate to that next critical resource, whether it's a grant application at a well-timed moment or access to a customer, building that social network, I think, is really important for founders in this space.
Great.
Would you add?
Last whip. Okay, great. So I will have 30 seconds from each of you. I'll ask a question on behalf of the audience, which is, this all sounds great. How do I get access to it? So, how would someone best effectively or approach you, or what programs do you have? Just quickly, somebody's in the audience saying, this sounds great, I want to do it. Johannes, what's their next step?
Yeah, I can get started. So there at Lab Central, if you go to our website, there are many events listed there. Most, I think, are open to the public. So you're invited to show up and just sit in the audience and participate in the conversation. And also, you can always apply for space. If you already do have a startup or a set of co-founders, you can always apply for space. There are no deadlines or anything like that. Get involved early and often.
Yep, I agree with that. So yeah, same thing. I included, along with the team, we read our hello at engine.xyz. It's amazing what actually comes through there. Like, we've had founders of very large Boston-based biotechs use hello at engine.xyz. So amazingly, we pay attention to that. The other on-road, just for something also more specific, we run a program that was designed in looking at NSF Core, which some of you may know, a number of the entrepreneurship programs at MIT. We thought there was a few components missing for what we call these tough technology companies. We put that together in a program called Blueprint that we run twice a year. It's free to participate. People just need to apply to the program. We run 70 to 100 teams, focused on a couple gaps that we saw with the existing entrepreneurial programs, focused on these tough technology types of companies. But that's a easy kind of on-ramp, and hopefully something that will help you in your own endeavors and in your thinking through your own companies. It's for kind of proto-founders, so people who are thinking about what would it take for me to start a company, especially of this type.
Kate?
So if you're a founder or a potential expert who wants to sort of give and receive, you can email community@masschallenge.org. Same thing, actually, if you're an investor and want to be part of our investor network. And if you're on the industry side, corporate, and are looking to engage with teams, you can email our partnerships team at partnership@masschallenge. It's on the website, and we have events, and we'd love to have you all there. Most of them are open.
Last word for you, Mark.
I would say join our online network, the 2,000 faculty and investors there. It's innovationmeshnetwork.org. If you don't have a Harvard, MGB, MIT email, shoot me an email. I'll register you myself. And that'll give you a low-friction way to watch our courses, watch our recorded grant rounds, and actually connect with unfettered access to everyone who's signed up there. So that would be number one. Number two is, if you are interested in biodesign, every fall we have our biodesign call for applications for advisors and for clinical champions or research champions who have an idea. Also, it's not limited just to degree holders. You can be staff, you can be nurses, anything. Sign up for our email list on our website, and you'll automatically get that.
Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. This was a great panel, so thank you very much.